Before we begin, I want to make something clear. This lesson is not an attempt to prove whether Yahuah expects his people to obey his commandments. I believe we are to obey them. Scripture makes that plain. Yahuah himself said in Ezekiel 36:27, "And I will put my spirit within you and cause you to walk in my statutes, and ye shall keep my judgments and do them." So obedience is not something I have to invent or force upon anyone. Yahuah already told us what his spirit will produce within his people. What I want to examine today is something different. If sin is the sickness and Yahuah's righteous law exposes that sickness, then what was actually wrong with mankind? Was the problem the righteous standard that kept revealing sin? Or was the problem what that standard kept finding inside of us? Paul begins answering that question in Romans 3:9 when he says, "For we have before proved both Jews and Gentiles that they are all under sin." Jew and Gentile alike had the same underlying condition. Sin had affected mankind, and nobody could escape the diagnosis simply because of who they were. Now think about Yahuah's law like an X-ray scanner. Romans 3:20 says, "For by the law is the knowledge of sin." And Romans 7:14 says, "For we know that the law is spiritual, but I am carnal, sold under sin." The scanner does not create the sickness, it discovers. It examines the patient and reveals what is already there. In the same way, Yahuah's righteous standard exposes what is happening within the person. If an X-ray reveals a diseased lung, you do not blame the X-ray machine for what appeared on the image. The machine simply gave an accurate reading. Once that diagnosis is made, the sensible response is to ask what must be done about the sickness. But imagine a patient who responds differently. The scan reveals a serious condition, and instead of becoming concerned about what is inside of him, he becomes angry with the machine that exposed it. He begins arguing against the scanner because he does not like the diagnosis. At that point, the condition may be even more serious than the first image revealed, because now the sickness has affected the way the patient thinks. Paul describes that condition in Romans 8:7, "Because the carnal mind is enmity against God, for it is not subject to the law of God, neither indeed can be." Sin does not only influence what a person does with his physical members, it can corrupt the mind until the patient begins viewing Yahuah's righteous standard as the enemy. He can argue against it, speak against it, resist it, and use his physical members to fight what exposed him. But none of those blows ever touch the real sickness. The disease remains inside. The patient has become so affected by the condition that he is now fighting the diagnosis instead of seeking healing. Once transgression entered the picture, Yahuah also established a system that dealt with it for an appointed period. Paul says in Galatians 3:19, that was added because of transgressions, till the seed should come to whom the promise was made. This is where the sacrificial and priestly system fits into our medical illustration. Hebrews 10:4 tells us, "For it is not possible that the blood of bulls and of goats should take away sins." Think of those sacrifices like medicine given to a patient whose underlying disease required something greater. The medicine was not meaningless. It had an appointed purpose, and the patient was required to receive it according to Yahuah's instructions. But it could not remove the sickness from its root. It was somewhat like giving Tylenol to someone whose condition ultimately requires surgery. The Tylenol may serve a real purpose for the moment, but nobody should confuse temporary relief with the removal of the disease itself. And this helps us understand the faithful people who lived before Yahusha. They were not patients who rejected Yahuwah's diagnosis. They believed him. They trusted his instructions and walked by faith according to what had been revealed to them. Yet something was still ahead of them. Hebrews 11:39 says, "And these all, having obtained a good report through faith, received not the promise." Then Hebrews 11:40 says, "God having provided some better thing for us, that they without us should not be made perfect." In the language of our illustration, those faithful people who died before Yahusha completed his appointed work were like patients waiting in quarantine. They had accepted the diagnosis. They trusted the one who promised the cure, but the doctor's appointed work had not yet been completed in history. Then Yahusha came. He did not come because the scanner was defective. He came because the patient needed something the scanner could never provide. A scan can reveal a diseased lung, but the scan cannot perform surgery. In the same way, the law can expose sin, but exposing the sickness is not the same as removing it. 1 John 3:8 says, "For this purpose the Son of God was manifested, that he might destroy the works of the devil." Yahusha came as the appointed doctor to deal with what Yahuwah's righteous standard kept finding within mankind. His work even reached those faithful people who had died waiting for what had been promised. Hebrews 9:15 speaks of his death for the redemption of the transgressions that were under the first testament. The doctor had arrived, and the cure that the temporary treatment could never provide had now been accomplished. This is why there is no reason to keep reaching for the old temporary treatment as though the doctor had never arrived. Once the one capable of addressing the sickness at its root has come, continuing to depend upon the temporary medicine misses the entire purpose for which it was given. But there is another mistake we can make. We can accept the doctor while expecting to remain permanently sick. Some patients want the doctor because they want relief from the consequences of the disease, but they do not necessarily want the disease itself removed. They want forgiveness. They want mercy. They want deliverance from judgment. Yet because of their relationship with the sickness, they may still want to preserve parts of what is destroying them. That would be like telling a surgeon, "I want you to save my life, but I also want you to leave some of the disease inside of me." That is not the purpose of the doctor. Yahusha did not come merely to make a sick patient more comfortable while sin continued ruling inside of him. The purpose of his work is to attack the condition itself. And this is where the Spirit becomes essential. Romans 8:4 says that the righteousness of the law might be fulfilled in us, who walk not after the flesh, but after the Spirit. That statement is important because Paul does not describe the righteous standard disappearing. He describes something happening in us. The patient is changing. The same standard that once exposed sin, working death in the person, can now begin revealing the results of what Yahuah is doing within that person through his Spirit. This also helps us understand Paul's words in Galatians 2:19. "For I through the law am dead to the law, that I might live unto God." Notice that Paul does not say the law died. He says, "I am dead to the law." The scanner performed its duty. It exposed the condition that was working death in him and showed him his need for the doctor. Then Paul continues in Galatians 2:20, I am crucified with Christ. Nevertheless, I live. The person who once stood under that diagnosis is not supposed to remain unchanged. The old man is crucified and a new life begins. In the language of our illustration, the patient can now say, through the diagnosis of the scan, I came to understand what was working death inside of me. But through the doctor and the treatment he prescribed, that condition no longer has to rule my life. And now we can understand why Romans 8:4 says the righteousness of the law can be fulfilled in us. The scanner continues to reveal the condition of the patient, but the reading should begin changing because the treatment is working. Galatians 5:22-23 says, but the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, long-suffering, gentleness, goodness, faith, meekness, temperance. Against such there is no law. Think about what that means within this picture. Where the righteous standard once exposed hatred, the Spirit can now produce love. Where it exposed uncontrolled desires, the Spirit produces temperance. Where sin produced rebellion against Yahuah, his Spirit causes his people to walk according to his will. The scanner did not need to change. The patient needed healing. And this brings us back to where we began. This lesson was never intended to argue that obedience is unnecessary. Yahuah already said what his Spirit would do. I will put my Spirit within you and cause you to walk in my statutes. The doctor did not come to teach patients how to live without Yahuah's righteous standard. He came to remove the sickness that kept causing them to violate it. That is why faith and obedience are not enemies in this picture. We are not obeying Yahuah in order to purchase the cure. We could never purchase it. The doctor provided what we could not provide for ourselves. But when the Spirit begins working within the patient, obedience becomes evidence that the treatment is accomplishing what Yahuah said it would accomplish. So the question is not whether we can destroy the scanner because we do not like the reading. The question is what the scanner is finding in us now. Is it still revealing the same sickness ruling our members while we defend the disease and fight the diagnosis? Or is it beginning to reveal the fruit of the Spirit as the doctor deals with the sickness at its root? The temporary treatment had its appointed time. The doctor has come. The Spirit has been given. And the purpose of the treatment is not simply that sick patients receive better excuses for bad scans. The purpose is healing, so that the righteousness of the law might actually be fulfilled in those who walk not after the flesh, but after the Spirit. So when Yahuah's righteous standard reveals something in us, do not fight the scanner. Submit to the doctor and let the Spirit do the work Yahuah promised it would do. Because the goal was never to hide the sickness. The goal was to be healed from it.